Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on one of my worm bins that I've got some information about over here on the board. It's red wigglers approaching 200 days of age. You can see information about the estimated worm population size. You can see information about how many times there have been feedings. But I think that the most important bits are the fact that this is the system where we've been not giving them any frozen foods. In fact, the last 13 out of 16 feedings have been stuff that's not been first frozen, which is really unusual because I freeze almost everything that the worms get fed. And today on the menu we've got some stuff, and somehow cucumber has been getting on the list a lot lately. I gotta maybe look into the cause of that. But I think the interesting thing is here at the bottom showing what happened during the last visit, which was we gave them a type of food which I normally don't feed in my systems, which is dragonfruit. So I'm very curious to see what has become of the dragonfruit based on all the feedback I've been getting from the viewers, because it does seem like there's the potential of it to be a pretty interesting check-in if it's as well received as some people have thought it could be. You can see we left a good number of leaves spread out here across the surface. And I thought we might do that again. That's the reason I've got my box of leaves here on standby. And I've also got my prepared bedding here on standby. In fact, we've got a little bit of coffee to include with today's feeding as well. So perhaps we'll recycle this as supplementary bedding as well. I usually like to work where we last fed, even though in most cases I'm feeding down the middle. But this is our feeding zone indicator that we'll repurpose since we're swapping it out with a new one. I've got my BTI solution, a little something that I'm kind of spreading around into all of my systems as more of a preventative measure. I mean, I don't see any flying insects down here in this bin, and I guess the whole idea of adding this stuff is to hopefully keep it that way. So, mosquito dunks, if it's something that you might even use and have around, it's been found to be pretty effective on controlling the flying insects in the worm bins, or at least I've had luck with it in the past, and I've seen others have pretty good luck with it in the past too. And not only are we going to recycle the feeding zone indicator to be supplemental bedding, but all this top coating, I think, since it's also going to get replaced, is going to be nice foundational bedding for the feeding. It makes me even wonder if I need my prepared bedding, if I've got all this stuff here that we could use. I see lots of springtails all over the place in this system, but I've been kind of training my brain to ignore them anymore because they are in some cases pretty prevalent in the system. Alright, I think that was a piece of pumpkin stem that was still holding out pretty good, but I've been very curious about these to see what it would feel like if I wanted to really just mush one, kind of crash. I gotta be careful, I think there's a little wormy there. So try to carefully see if I can just obliterate this pumpkin stem, which is what I'm assuming I'd be able to do after it's been sitting in the bin, soaking through, and microorganisms chomping away at it, gradually breaking it down for us. But this would be one way to help things like this that would otherwise take a long time. Kind of just help them get to the finish line a little bit sooner. So I think the way we left this system last time we checked in on this together in a video was with a single piece of newspaper. I think that second piece of newspaper I had out here as sort of just an extra secondary layer. I think I added that later, after the last check-in. And and I was just curious to see if that extra layer of paper would help keep moisture in better than if it was just a single sheet of paper. And it does seem like it's done quite a nice job. That was weird because I just stuck my finger in right down below where I would assume the dragon fruit would have been left, which would have been right in the middle. And all I encountered was just a huge mob of worms. And here, I believe I'm already starting to see the remnants of the dragon fruit. It's that white pasty material with the black seeds in it. And they're as the viewers suggested they would, they're loving it. You could tell they're just loving it. Alright, here we just had a little piece of the dragon fruit fall off my hand, and then these little guys must have been connected to it because now they're starting to sort of flow off. But I think my point with that was that if it hadn't been for that piece of food falling off, nothing else would have fallen off my hand, because the worms, even though they vanish out of view, they're still on my hand. They're just under the food now. If you turn it over, you can see what I'm talking about. So that was definitely interesting. Something I've not yet experienced, which is feeding dragon fruit in my worm bins. Man, they really like that stuff. So the viewers who have already experienced the turnout when you feed dragon fruit have been commenting on my video from the last check-in, sort of setting my expectations about how the worms are going to receive that last feeding they got. And, well, as usual, the viewers were spot on with their prediction on what would have happened in here. And I'm glad we came back, you know, pretty soon. Only 11 days ago that we fed that thing, but I really did want to come back in here while they were still hard at work on the thing and while there might still be some leftovers. So I was definitely curious to see what the turnout might be like. So, you know, I kind of glossed over it, but this is the stem of a Brussels sprout plant, and it's been holding together so good, but it just seems like it's rupturing here in my hand, possibly just from worm movement. And look at that, you can see the worms in there. They are jammed into this thing, and as long as it's still kind of holding together as a hollow circular item, for some reason I think the worms are just always going to like being in there, because they seem to really like confined spaces. But that was just really cool to see right there. And I'm not going to help it, but I've just got this funny feeling. Oh, there we go. Me being clumsy again, just kind of did the exact opposite of what I was trying to get into saying, which was I was not going to help it open up this way, but it's too late. My finger sort of slipped and bumped into it, and it did crack off this one edge of it. So that's kind of the beginning of the end, I believe, on this thing. It'll definitely still be in here as leftovers with long strands of material gradually getting worked down, but it's no longer a kind of solid intact piece anymore, or at least not according to my definition of it. So that's definitely a cool object that we've been tracking for some time now. I really don't have a read exactly on how long it's been in the bin, but something, I don't know, I thought that there was another similar piece that went to shreds like this so soon after it was placed into the bin versus this one that just held together forever. This thing we kind of glossed over it in the beginning too. This was just a piece of gourd, which is always getting more and more fragile. Just as a little bit of a test to see how it's deteriorating, I'll sometimes chip off a few pieces and it just gets easier and easier and easier. Pretty soon I won't really have any more gourd left to inspect that way, but we've got a few leftovers here, but I'd like to make a fairly good size feeding zone, because I did want to add all this lovely recycled leafy matter as bedding to go down into the feeding zone, and it seemed to me like a fair bit of material, so I thought we probably needed to open up a pretty good size space into which it would all fit. I think this should work, so let's see how that goes. It seems like it's fitting in pretty nicely. Yeah, let's not forget we wanted to also repurpose this feeding zone indicator to also be a piece of supplementary bedding. And before we get too close to the surface, one of the things I've got here was so gross I didn't even want to take it out of its bag. I figured we would try to just drop it in and close it up as quickly as we could without needing to smell it, because it was pretty stinky. And I can't even remember exactly what this thing is. I don't know, it's like knob celery or some sort of a soup vegetable that just kind of went to went to heck in a handbasket. So that's some of our non-frozen stuff. And here's half of a cucumber that's been looking pretty nasty on that coloring. And you know, on the topic of nasty, I'm starting to smell that unusual or is it knob celery, or sometimes you could buy radish, but it's not little round radishes, it's like a radish root or something that has the same flavor and smell or whatever. I'm not 100% certain, but you know what, before we get too far along and cover up these yummy foods we just added, let's get the grit that we want to include nearby, and then in can come the coffee portion. I've got my lovely worm chow here that I like to mix in with the coffee sometimes, and it seems like we've got room to spare. I didn't know. I was looking at this big pile of leaves and it seemed to me like it was so much. I wanted to make sure we allowed ourselves to have sufficient space down in the feeding zone into which we could place all the new yummy foods, and not to mention leaving a little bit of space for the leftovers. And I'll definitely be interested to see how this stem over here continues. Alright, what's this? That's like half of a seed from a avocado. Oops, okay. I chipped off a piece of it, but I'm not sure where the other piece went. It almost felt like it flew over my shoulder that way. And the gourd. Okay, the gourd was the last thing, I believe. So, really nice feeding. I'm going to cover up the feeding zone by kind of reaching out a bit further than I need to bring in material from the outer edges. Here on the outer edges, I think we didn't have that double cover of newspaper, only down the middle. And down the middle was also where the dragon fruit had been placed, which, along with its moisture content, probably helped to keep this middle area a little bit more damp. But out here on the edges, I'm finding the material to be a little bit drier. Not dry to the point where it would be uncomfortable. I mean, you can see as I till it up, it's chock full of worms. Well, not chock full. I think chock full is somewhere near where the dragon fruit is, or was. That's chock full. Oh, brother. What is it that they're so jazzed about over here? Well, looks like we got through this feeding without needing to use any of my prepared bedding. I think that beautiful coating of leaves on the top surface made for probably a much better bedding than they could have possibly hoped for. Well, at this point I just figured I would try to take a closer look as to what it is that they're so excited about here. To me it just looks like a piece of paper, but I could be wrong. It has kind of a... yeah, well, they might just be paper. Worms. Who knows? Never know what to expect with these little guys. They have like a mind of their own. Inside that little squirmy body, it's hard to imagine that they would have a mind. But, you know, before we button things up here, we're going to add some more leafy material. I think in part because I really like the way that stuff gets to get reused. And it also seems like a really good kind of scrub material to get all this residue off my gloves too. Oops. Well, that is, unless you manage to pick up another piece of residue and smear it all over yourself again, which means you need to come back in with yet another handful of leaves, which I was going to add anyway, so it doesn't matter. And you know, I think the other thing I'd like to include in here as sort of a parting material is just a little bit more of that BTI solution. As we saw in the beginning, there was really no sign of any flying insects. I mean, I do have a few of them here and there in a couple of my systems, and I did notice during the check-in a couple coming by to see what was going on here, but I did not get the impression that the system has any living in it per se. So that's cool, and I'd really like to keep it that way. So back on come the dual newspaper coverings, but you know what? Not until after we've marked where we last fed. So we know where to check when we come back in here to see how they're doing on that cucumber and on that other crazy looking large rotting vegetable. Not rotting, because I don't think I smelled anything like that, but definitely well on the way of decomposing and breaking down. So that's it for our check-in, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.